Hello, and thank you for watching. This is called The Secrets of Pecan City. Pecan City is a small little non-incorporated area on the outskirts of Albany, Georgia, in southwest Georgia. And it's an area I grew up with. It sits right along railroad tracks. And we used to live out there when I was a little boy. And my grandmother was our neighbor. My grandmother loved the Lord. And when we were growing up, when you walked by our house, occasionally you would hear a roar. It was coming out of her bedroom, and it was her praying. And anybody that came around our house knew that she loved the Lord. And she was a great testimony to us. It was such a blessing to be raised in that area. She owned a store. She was like the Proverbs 31 woman. And she owned a store right across the street. And we had like at least two black people that worked for us or worked for my grandparents there. And one of them was a giant man. His name was Connus. And I was a little boy, and Connus loved me. And whenever my bicycle had a flat tire or any kind of little problem, Connus was coming to run. I was a little boy. I had two brothers, and Connus was just like family. He loved us. And then we had a lady that worked for my grandparents and my parents. Her name was Johnny May. And she was another sweet lady. She treated us just like her own. And man, she was such a fine lady and such a blessing to us. And then also in the area, there were little black kids at times. And one kid, I remember his name was Joe Ben. I don't know whatever became of him. And anyway, just a lot of little kids. We were little white kids, and we mingled with the black kids, and we didn't see color. You know, they were our friends, and we'd get in trouble. We'd get spankings with them, get in trouble with them. I remember one time Joe Ben had a pack of matches, and he was thumping them, he would thump them so it would catch on fire as it leaves the matchbox. I remember one time he thumped one, and it went straight up and landed in his afro. And he's like, where'd it go? He couldn't find the match. And all of a sudden you hear this little singeing noise. His hair was on fire. And of course, we were all beating his head, put the fire out. We were just little kids having a good time. But the secret of Pecan City was in the black people there. And Pecan City neighbors Sunnyland Farms. And there's other areas out there that grows pecans. And we were real good friends with the Wilson family. The Wilson family, at the time, I hadn't been out there in a long time. I don't know who owns the area or what, but the Wilson family back then owned it. And we were real good friends with them, and they were good friends of my parents and my grandparents. We all got along so good. And all these different farms out there contracted with black people to come in and pick up the pecans. Back then, they hired an enormous labor force to come in and just pick up pecans off the ground. They didn't have the technology back then to let a tractor drive along and pick up the pecans. I remember they had a tractor that would shake the trees. It'd come up and put a boom on the side of a tree and shake the tree, and the pecans would fall. And then the laborers would come in and pick up all the pecans off the ground. And I think today they have heavy-duty equipment that just drives along and picks up the pecans. Haven't kept up with all that technology, but I remember back then that we used to make fun of the black people because they were speaking at times we just couldn't understand them. And it sounded to us like they were slurring their conversation. They would talk to us a while, then get to talking, and didn't make any sense. And we were like, we thought they were crazy. And in the South, they had jokes. They had jokes they said about black people. And I remember making jokes about them too. What we didn't know was, I'll tell you in just a second, a couple of years ago, I went to Nigeria. I've spent the last 2 years moving through Nigeria and Togo and other areas doing missionary work. When I arrived in Nigeria, I discovered there was another language there. I knew they would have a tribal language. I understood that. All of them, they speak English, and they have a tribal language from the area they grew up within Nigeria. What I didn't know was there's a language called Pidgin English. I think it's spelled Pidgin. You can Google it. It's called Pidgin English. It sounds like the bird pigeon, but I think it's spelled Pidgin, Pidgin. Could be Gen, something like that. But it's another language. It's a modification of the English language. And when I arrived there, I'm like, don't this sound so familiar? I'm like, well, I was staring at these people. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was hearing the language that I heard when I was a little boy at that pecan, that's pecan orchards in Albany, in Pecan City. It was the same language. What had happened was that language had been handed down from generation to generation. The original slaves that came before the Civil War, those were like, they came from Nigeria and they came from Ghana, mainly. If you study the trade routes in Nigeria and Ghana, there's actually places where they memorialize particular buildings near the coastline where they had captured slaves, captured them, and brought them to these locations, and then a ship came up and they loaded the ships. And anyway, in Nigeria, you might think somebody from Nigeria is not intelligent, but you need to think again, because they all know at least 3 languages. I'm talking about these blacks in Nigeria. They all know at least 3 languages. I mean, at least the ones I met in Port Harcourt knew 3. They knew their tribal language. They knew English. And they knew Pidgin English, and some of them knew even more than that. Some of them had been around the world and came back, and so they at least knew 3 languages. Here I was in Pecan City, Georgia. I knew 1 language, English. That's all I knew. That's still all I know. I know a little bit of some other languages, but I'm fluent in English. But there in Albany, Georgia, there south in Pecan City, those people that I was around when I was growing up, those ladies and those men that were so kind and so good to us, when we couldn't understand them, when we were making fun of them, guess what? They were speaking another highly intelligent language. They could communicate amongst themselves, and we didn't understand them. Whenever they went from Pidgin English to English, then we could understand them. But when they went back to Pidgin English, we didn't understand them. We couldn't understand hardly anything. We just thought that they had big lips and they were slurring their syllables and whatever. We just thought that they were non-intelligent, slurring their vocabulary and slurring their communication. We thought that, whatever. And they understood each other. I remember watching them. They would visit. I remember sitting on the patio with them at my grandmother's. She had a big porch in the front with a swing and stuff. I remember sitting there on the patio and them there talking and saying communication I didn't even understand. I remember being near my grandmother's store. I remember them talking, and I remember them saying things just didn't even make sense to me. I'm like, you guys can't even talk right, And no, it was an intelligent language. They understood exactly what they were saying. See, that was handed down from the Civil War days. It started before the Civil War days, and then it passed on from generation to generation. And those people in Pecan City knew that language. Well, these days in the USA in the South, I never hear that language. I've been around many black people in the USA, and I haven't heard that language. As a matter of fact, anybody that I speak to in the US, any black person that I speak to in the USA, their communication is better than mine. Really, it's better than mine. They're more a master of English than I am. So they speak really good communication there. And I haven't heard Pidgin English there in Georgia in a long time. I don't know if they just ceased to teach their youth it anymore. I don't know. But one thing for sure, when I was growing up there, it was being spoken. And I have to say today that I am just amazed. I made the discovery of Pecan City when I was in Nigeria. I was in Nigeria and I was hearing this stuff being spoken again. And then it hit me. Wow, that's what I was hearing as a little boy there in Pecan City near Albany, Georgia. Anyway, that's a little history lesson. For many people, it's not going to be significant. It's not a Bible study. I'm a Bible believer, and we preach the whole counsel of God, and whosoever will, let him come and drink of the water of life freely. And that includes white people, black people, Asiatics, it doesn't matter. We're just glad that we get the opportunity to preach to them. Well, anyway, hope this little presentation speech on the secret of Pecan City has been a blessing to you. Thank you very much for watching.